The first time I saw him, I was convinced the universe was mocking me. It wasn't just the timing. It was the cruel theater of fate-me life falling apart in the courtroom. And then he walked in, his presence as impossible to ignore as a thunderclap in silence. He wasn't supposed to matter. He was just another attorney, another name on the docket, another polished suit standing on the opposite side of justice. But from the second our eyes met, my pulse betrayed me. I wasn't staring at an adversary. I was staring at the one thing I had spent years trying to bury. Longing. His name was Daniel Reed. At least, that's what the clerk announced. But in my head, it echoed louder than any gavel slam. Daniel. Like a whisper, like a promise. He was new to the city. I could tell his eyes had that restless, searching brightness, like someone who hadn't yet been ground down by the weight of this courthouse, this system, this unforgiving city. And me? I was already frayed. Matthew Cole, 32, defense attorney with too many losses and too many secrets. I'd learned to play the role. The calm voice, the sharp arguments, the man who looked the jury in the eye and never flinched. But underneath it all, I was exhausted off the job, of the battles, of the loneliness that gnawed at me every night when the suits came off and the silence came in. So of course fate had to throw Daniel in my path. Of course, the universe had to test me with the one thing I couldn't allow myself to want. The trial that day was brutal. The air was thick with tension as I fought tooth and nail for my client. And there he was, Daniel, on the opposing side. He was fire wrapped in elegance, every objection. Every counterargument was crisp, deliberate, and laced with conviction. His voice carried a steady power, the kind that made the jury lean in without realizing they were falling under his spell. I hated him for it. I admired him for it. And I couldn't stop watching him. Every now and then, his gaze flickered to me. Sharp, curious, like he knew I was staring, like he didn't mind. By the time the session adjourned, my head was pounding. I stepped outside, desperate for air, only to find him already there on the courthouse steps. Sunlight kissed his hair in a way that made it look golden, almost unfairly so. He lit a cigarette, exhaled slowly, and then, without even glancing, held the pack out to me. "I don't smoke," I muttered. My voice cracked, betraying me. "Neither do I," he said, with a smile so sly it could have been a secret. Just looks convincing after a trial. That smile was dangerous. It was the kind of smile that could unravel defenses I had spent years perfecting. I should have walked away. I should have kept it professional, polite, distant. But my feet betrayed me, anchoring me there beside him. For the first time in months, maybe years, the silence between me and another human being didn't feel unbearable. Felt charged. "Not bad in there," he said, finally glancing at me. His blue eyes so startling up close I nearly lost my composure. "You've got a way with words." Almost had me convinced. "Almost?" I asked, forcing a smirk. He tilted his head, cigarette forgotten between his fingers. "Don't push your luck." And just like that, something shifted. The courthouse, the trial, the weight of the system pressing down on Uzel of it faded. It was just me and him, two men orbiting something we both knew was forbidden, dangerous, and inevitable. That night, I told myself I wouldn't think about him again. I told myself it was a passing distraction, a flicker I could smother. But Daniel Reed had already carved himself into the corners of my mind, and no amount of denial could unmake the truth. One look had changed everything. The following week was a war. Every day we clashed in court like sworn enemies. He challenged me with precision, never backing down, and I found myself raising my game just to keep up. But beneath the sharp words and icy stares, there was always that undercurrent, that unspoken tension neither of us could ignore. During recess, we traded sarcastic remarks, almost like a secret language. In the evenings, I caught myself replaying the way his eyes lingered just a second too long, the way his lips curved into a half-smile when he thought no one was watching. It was infuriating. It was intoxicating. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, I found him again outside the courthouse. This time, no cigarettes. Just him, leaning against the stone railing, the city buzzing behind him. You really don't give up, do you? I asked. He smirked. Neither do you. The silence stretched, thick with everything we couldn't say. And then, for reasons I still don't understand, I asked, drink. His smile widened, slow and knowing. Lead the way. That first drink turned into 3. The dimly lit bar became our battlefield and our sanctuary all at once. He teased me about my tie. I teased him about his laugh. We didn't talk about the case, not really. Instead, we talked about everything else: the city, the long hours, the loneliness we both wore like a second skin. And somewhere between the second glass and the unguarded honesty in his eyes, I realized I was in trouble. Because Daniel Reed wasn't just a colleague. He wasn't just a rival. He was the beginning of something I had spent my whole life running from. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to run anymore. The morning after that bar night, I woke with the taste of whiskey still lingering and Daniel's laughter echoing in my head. I tried to shake it off, to bury myself in the mountain of files waiting on my desk, but every word I read blurred into fragments of him. His smile. The way he leaned in like he wasn't afraid of the world seeing him too close to me. By the time I arrived at the courthouse, I'd convinced myself that last night meant nothing. 2 colleagues blowing off steam. That was all. Then I saw him. Daniel was standing by the lobby window, sunlight streaming over his shoulders, his tie slightly loosened, his sleeves rolled up in a way that made him look too relaxed for someone about to argue a case. He turned at the sound of my footsteps, and for a split second, his expression softened like he'd been waiting. My chest tightened. Damn it. You're late, he said, voice even, but his eyes flickered with something else. I'm not late. You're early? I shot back, brushing past him. My tone was sharper than I intended, a defense I clung to because anything else felt too dangerous. His low chuckle followed me into the courtroom. The trial consumed us. Day after day, we stood on opposite sides, battling with words that cut sharper than knives. But beneath the clashing arguments, our connection grew like an ember refusing to die. We would lock eyes across the room, and the world fell away. Every objection carried a hidden message. Every pause in his speech felt like a breath shared between us. By the end of the second week, the tension was unbearable. One night, after a particularly vicious cross-examination where we both left the courtroom sweating with adrenaline, I found him waiting outside near the courthouse steps again. No crowd, no colleagues, just him, leaning against the railing, the city lights flickering behind him. You're relentless, I muttered, loosening my tie. He smirked. And you love it. I should have walked away, but instead, I stood beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body, close enough to hear the way his breath caught when I didn't leave. You play dirty, I said. So do you, he countered. And then the silence fell. The kind that dared one of us to break it, to admit what we both already knew. When I finally looked at him, his gaze was steady, unflinching, searching mine like he was memorizing me. I didn't realize how close we'd gotten until I could feel his breath ghosting across my lips. For one dangerous, reckless second, I almost closed the distance. Almost. But footsteps echoed in the distance, and the moment snapped like a rubber band. Daniel stepped back, his mask sliding into place. Good night, Matthew, he said softly, his voice carrying something unspoken. And then he was gone. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his eyes, his smile, the way he said my name like it wasn't just syllables but something worth holding. I hated it, craved it. I thought about the years I had spent hiding this part of myself. About the church pews where I prayed to be different, the locker rooms where I laughed too loud to cover the fear, the quiet apartments where I buried myself in casework so I wouldn't have to face the emptiness of being alone. And now here he was, Daniel Reed, the storm I hadn't asked for but couldn't turn away from. The following week, we lost the trial. It wasn't my first defeat, but this one cut deeper. The evidence had been stacked against us, but I had fought with everything I had, pouring myself into every argument, every plea. And still, it wasn't enough. When the gavel came down, my client's eyes filled with despair, and guilt clawed at me. I had failed him. I packed my files with trembling hands, trying to ignore the burning in my throat. Across the room, Daniel caught my eye. He had won, but his expression wasn't triumphant, it was something else. Concern. Sympathy. I couldn't stand it. I stormed out of the courtroom, the weight of defeat crushing me. But Daniel followed. "Matthew," he called, his voice steady. I didn't stop. I didn't want his pity. But then his hand caught my arm. Firm. Warm. Anchoring. "Hey," he said softly. "You fought like hell in there. Don't you dare think otherwise." I froze. The sincerity in his voice disarmed me more than any argument ever had. Slowly, I looked up at him, and for the first time, I saw him not as my rival, not as my colleague, but as something else entirely, someone who saw me. And I hated how much I needed that. "You don't know me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. His gaze didn't waver. "Maybe not, but I want to." That was the night I gave in. We didn't plan it. We didn't even speak much. One moment, we were standing in the shadows of the courthouse, the city alive around us, and the next, I was pulling him closer, my lips crashing against his with a desperation I didn't know I still had. He kissed me back like he'd been waiting for it, like he'd been holding it in as long as I had. His hands tangled in my hair, mine gripped his shirt, and the world fell away until there was nothing left but us. When we finally broke apart, gasping, his forehead rested against mine. "This is a mistake," I whispered, though my body betrayed me by pulling him closer. "Maybe," he said, his voice ragged, "but it feels like the first right thing in a long time." And I believed him. For weeks, we lived in the in-between. By day, we were adversaries, clashing in court with sharp words and sharper gazes. By night, we were something else, two men caught in a dangerous orbit, finding solace in the quiet moments no one else could see. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. Every stolen glance, every secret touch, every whispered laugh in the shadows. But it couldn't last. Because in America, in the eyes of the court, in the eyes of our colleagues and families, men like us weren't supposed to exist. Not like this. Not together. And as much as I wanted to believe we could outrun the world, deep down, I knew the storm was coming. The storm came faster than I thought. It started with whispers in the courthouse halls. A stray look here, a rumor there. Lawyers talked. Clerks noticed. People in this building thrived on gossip, and Daniel and I had been reckless. Too many late nights leaving together. Too many arguments that carried a current of something more. One morning, I walked into the break room and felt it. The shift. The eyes. A junior associate offered me a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Two paralegals hushed their voices the second I stepped in. The air was thick with judgment, and I knew someone had seen us. When I returned to my office, Daniel was waiting. He looked paler than usual, his jaw tight, his hand gripping the doorknob like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "We have a problem," he said. I closed the door behind us. "Who knows? Does it matter?" His voice was sharp, clipped. "Word spreads fast here. My firm is already sniffing around. If they even suspect, they'll bury us." I finished. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. We both knew the stakes. Our careers weren't just jobs. They were our armor, our identities, the only things that gave us a place in this world that had spent years telling us we didn't belong. If we lost that, what was left? He raked a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Maybe we should," he didn't finish. "Don't say it," I snapped. "Matthew," he said, softer this time, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of fear and longing. "If it comes down to you or my career," the words sliced through me before he could finish. I turned away, my chest burning. "Get out," I muttered. He hesitated, pain flickering in his gaze, but he obeyed. The door shut behind him, and with it, something inside me cracked. For days, we avoided each other. In court, we were nothing but professionals, icy, precise, untouchable. Outside, we were strangers. I buried myself in work, in case files, in anything that would keep me from thinking about the way his lips had felt against mine, the way his laugh used to disarm me, the way I hated and loved him in equal measure. But the universe wasn't done with us. 2 weeks later, we were assigned to the same high-profile case, a brutal assault trial that the entire city was watching. And for the first time, instead of being on opposite sides, we were forced to work together. When I saw his name on the paperwork, my stomach dropped. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked the judge's clerk. She shrugged. "You two are the best. The DA wants you on this." The best. I almost laughed. They had no idea how dangerous it was to put us in the same room again. The first meeting was agony. We sat across from each other in a sterile conference room. Files spread out, the air buzzing with everything we weren't saying. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, but his gaze was sharp as ever. "Let's just get through this," he muttered. "Fine by me," I said. For hours we dissected the case, throwing arguments back and forth, challenging each other like old times. But underneath the words was something Elsean ache, a pull neither of us could ignore. Every time his hand brushed mine reaching for a document, every time our eyes met too long across the table, the tension grew unbearable. Finally, during a break, I couldn't take it anymore. I followed him into the empty hallway, grabbed his arm, and forced him to face me. "This isn't working," I said. "What isn't?" His voice was low, guarded. "Us, pretending we don't exist. Pretending none of this happened." His jaw clenched. "And what do you suggest, Matthew? That we walk into that courtroom holding hands? That we give them exactly what they want: scandal, headlines, a reason to destroy us?" I stepped closer, anger and longing twisting inside me. "I don't care what they think anymore. I care about you." His eyes softened for the briefest second before hardening again. "And I care about surviving in this world. Do you understand that?" The words hit like a slap, but I didn't back down. "Then maybe surviving isn't enough," I whispered. And for once he had no reply. The trial consumed us. Long nights bled into early mornings, our lives shrinking to the four walls of the courthouse and the shadows of our shared exhaustion. But somewhere in the chaos, the walls between us began to crack again. It was small at first, a shared laugh over a ridiculous witness, a late-night coffee run where his hand brushed mine, a moment of silence where our eyes met and lingered too long. One night, after a marathon prep session, I found him asleep on the conference room couch, files scattered around him. His tie was loosened, his face unguarded, softer than I'd ever seen it. I stood there for a long time, just watching him, the weight of everything pressing down on me. And then, without thinking, I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. He stirred, eyes fluttering open, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. "Matthew," he whispered, voice thick with sleep and something deeper. I bent down before I could stop myself, my lips brushing his in the faintest, most fragile kiss. He sighed against my mouth, his hand finding mine, and in that moment the world disappeared. But the world always comes back. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Someone had seen us. Someone had taken a photo, leaning over him, his hand in mine. It was splashed across the news sites, whispered in the courthouse, dissected in hushed tones and cruel smirks. Scandal in the courtroom. Attorneys caught in secret affair. By noon, both our firms were in damage control mode. My boss called me into his office, his face grim. "Is it true?" he asked, sliding the photo across the desk. I opened my mouth, but no words came. "You're one of the best lawyers I've got, Matthew. But if you don't get ahead of this, you're done." "We both are." I walked out of his office numb. Across the hall, I saw Daniel being ushered into a similar meeting, his expression unreadable. For hours, I waited, hoping he'd come find me, hoping he'd fight. But when he finally did, his face was hard, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "I told you this would happen," he said. "Daniel, this can't go on. We're finished." The words gutted me. I tried to speak, to plead, but he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the wreckage of everything we'd built. For weeks, I moved through life like a ghost. Work felt meaningless. The courthouse was suffocating. Every corner reminded me of him, our stolen moments, our whispered words, the love we'd almost had. But grief has a way of clarifying things. One night, staring out at the city from my apartment window, I realized I had a choice. I could keep hiding, keep pretending, keep letting fear dictate my life. Or I could fight for myself, for the truth, for the man who had changed everything with one look. For the first time, I knew what I wanted. I wanted Daniel. The next morning, I found him outside the courthouse, just like the first time. He looked at me surprised, wary. "We need to talk," I said. He shook his head. "There's nothing left to say." "There's everything left to say." I stepped closer, my voice trembling but steady. "I don't care about the whispers, the headlines, the jobs. I care about you. I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending this isn't real." His eyes flickered, his mask cracking. "Matthew, tell me you don't feel the same," I challenged. "Look me in the eye and tell me this meant nothing." Silence stretched between us. His breath hitched, his jaw clenched, and then finally his shoulders sagged. "I can't," he whispered. Relief and fear flooded me all at once. "Then don't," I said, my hand reaching for his. "Don't throw this away." For a moment he hesitated, his eyes searching mine. And then, slowly, he laced his fingers with mine. And just like that, the world shifted again. The backlash was merciless. In the weeks that followed, every headline, every whisper in the courthouse halls, every pointed glance reminded us that we weren't just two men in love, we were a spectacle, a scandal, a story everyone wanted to tear apart. My firm suspended me, pending review. Daniel's partners cornered him with ultimatums that boiled down to one cruel choice: his career or me. Our families weren't kinder. My father's voice over the phone was flat, cold. "You've embarrassed us, Matthew. Don't call again." Daniel's mother wrote him a letter filled with scripture and silence. A letter that left him staring at the words like they were knives. For a while, it nearly broke us. We fought. God, how we fought. Not in the courtroom anymore, but in dim apartments, in whispered arguments at midnight, in the quiet spaces where our fear lived. "You don't understand," Daniel snapped one night, pacing the floor of my living room. "I worked my whole damn life for this. I clawed my way into that firm, that reputation. And now it's all what?" I cut him off. "Gone? Because you love me? Because they'll never let me forget it," he shot back. His voice cracked. "Because I'll never be good enough again in their eyes. And maybe I can survive losing them. But I can't survive losing myself." His words hit me harder than any verdict ever had. Because I knew what he meant. I spent years losing myself too. Years burying every part of me that wanted, that hoped, that loved. But not anymore. "I'm not asking you to give up your career," I said softly. "I'm asking you to stop giving up yourself. Don't you see, Daniel? They don't get to define you. You do. And you don't have to do it alone." His shoulders slumped. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. For the first time, he didn't argue. The turning point came during the trial's closing arguments. It was a case that had gripped the city for weeks. The jury hung on every word. The press devoured every development. And there we were, two men who had become as much a part of the story as the crime itself. Everyone was waiting to see us stumble. But instead, we stood together. Daniel spoke first, his voice calm but charged with fire. He laid out the facts, piece by piece, his conviction unshakable. When he finished, he glanced at me, a flicker of something raw passing between us, and then it was my turn. I rose, the weight of the room pressing down on me, and I did something I had never dared before. I spoke not just as an attorney, but as a man who had nothing left to hide. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, "the law is about truth, not the kind of truth that hides in shadows, not the kind that bends to fear or judgment, but the kind that stands in the light. My client deserves that truth. We all do." For a moment, my eyes found Daniel's, and though no one else could see it, I let him know that I wasn't just talking about the case. I was talking about us. When the jury returned with a verdict guilty, it felt like a victory bigger than the trial. Not because we'd won, but because we had done it without pretending, without erasing ourselves. The press wanted a soundbite. The courthouse wanted drama. Instead, Daniel and I walked out side by side, silent, our shoulders brushing as the cameras flashed. And for the first time, I didn't care who saw. It wasn't easy after that. We lost jobs. We lost friends. We lost the illusion that we could live quietly, unnoticed. But in the ashes, something new began. Daniel left his firm. I walked away from mine. Together, we started something of our own, a small practice, tucked into a modest office in Brooklyn. We took the cases no one else wanted, the ones buried under bureaucracy and neglect. Immigrants, kids who'd been tossed aside, people who couldn't afford real representation. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy, but it was ours. And slowly, the noise around us quieted. The headlines moved on. The whispers faded. What remained was the life we built brick by brick, case by case, morning by morning. One evening, months later, I came home to find Daniel in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, music playing low from his phone. He was terrible at cooking, but he tried anyway, and I leaned against the doorway, watching him, smiling despite myself. He turned, caught me staring, and smirked. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just wondering how I got here." He set the spoon down and crossed the room, his hand finding mine. "You fought for it," he murmured. I kissed him then, slow and unhurried, the kind of kiss that didn't need to hide, that didn't need to apologize. The world still wasn't perfect. There were still stares, still moments of fear, still scars that wouldn't fully heal. But we had each other. And on the nights when the doubts crept back in, when the old voices whispered that we didn't belong, I'd remember the first time I saw him, the courtroom, the sunlight, the spark that had split my life in two. One look had changed everything, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. That's how our story ends, not with a grand triumph, not with the world bowing at our feet, but with something quieter, something stronger. Two men standing together. Two lives no longer lived in shadows, and a love that outlasted every verdict. Because in the end, the truth was simple. I met my new colleague at court, and one look changed everything. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.